You'll do fine.
Yeah, I will. I just hope my brain kicks in, but it usually does. Been doing this a long time.
You just let me know when you're. Are you?
The zoot suit, right, is these pants that are very long, right, very balloon effect, right? The jacket, which is also excess material, shoulder pads, and also long as well. There's like a gold chain, right? Bright colors, very exuberant colors, hats with like feathers on them, right? And so that style, like I just mentioned, that exaggeration, that beauty, right? And in a way of like working class beauty that again is tied to sort of black culture, I think really reveals sort of how black and brown folks were trying to create a culture for themselves and then found themselves under attack, right, by some folks in white America. And you know, when you watch the movie Malcolm X, Malcolm X was a zoot suiter himself too. So I think it's just so interesting because it's something that we share, and it also in a way is that generation that sets up, right, the black civil rights movement as well as the Mexican American civil rights movement, and where they look back at their Pachucos and take pride. And it becomes this pride of Chicanismo, it's pride of our history here in the United States of using culture to negotiate identity. I think the Pachuco and the Zoot Suit, you know, it's now become sort of nostalgia, right? And it's sort of a way, it's part of this genealogy of the way that we create community, how we use culture to fashion identity. You know, even today, people, you know, will, instead of wearing tuxedos for their quinceanera or their weddings, they'll put on the zoot suit instead of sort of renting limos, right? They'll rent lowriders. So I think the zoot suit and the lowrider sort of become these symbols of what it means to be Chicano, what it means to be Mexican American. It's part of that historical memory of our past communities, but it still has relevance and true sort of like tactile reactions for our community and youth, right? Who a lot of these youth, some of them, their parents were not zoot suiters, right? Because of all the constant immigration. So they learn about sort of that culture here, right? In the barrios, right? Of the zoot suits, you know? And so I think for that's a great question with African American, because obviously it comes out of African American culture, but you could definitely argue that like the zoot suit is really this embraced sort of symbol or iconography of what it means to be Chicano, right? And it's something that continues to be celebrated to today. I, you know, some of my African American colleagues, we've talked about this, and they said maybe it's because Black folks, we have a lot of other cultural sort of elements to sort of embrace, right, and sort of like claim. But definitely, you could argue that Mexican Americans have kept up, right, the cultural language of the zoot suit and continue to sort of remake it. Like even this young generation, you know, merging the zoot suit with the rockabilly culture, that's a completely different musical genre, right? Or even the punk culture with like psychobilly, right? Or the hot rod culture where you're seeing people in zoot suits, people dressed like glamorized cholos, people with like pink and purple hair, right? I love that, right? Sort of all of the colors of our culture, and definitely that zoot suit, that pachuco, is right in the mix. Well, not all Chicano youth or Mexican American youth were into zoot suit culture, right? So there were also during that same time period, there was like MAPA here in LA, which was this Mexican American youth organization that was about stressing Americanness in college. So when you have the zoot suit, you also have youth that are buying it, really buying in and embracing this notion that I am American, I can achieve my success, even though there's racial barriers, right? So I feel like those cultural tensions exist, right, in our community even to today, right? That not everybody believes like, and even our own community, some of them saw the zoot suiters as gangsters, as criminal, just like they did with the cholos as well, or the lowriders them well, right? So I think anytime we're trying to sort of understand Mexican American history and culture, it's very complicated, right? So we're talking about the zoot suit, but that would mean that, hey, everybody loved the zoot suit. Not everybody loved the zoot suit, right? There, and maybe people were into different musical genres, right? Of like, you know, like American jazz or I don't know, whatever. But I think what's important about that time period, right, is that the zoot suit, like you were saying, yeah, what does that mean for the homeboys and how did that affect sort of that community? In the Chicano movement, the zoot suiter, the aesthetics, you know, really is embraced by Chicano artists, right? Where you have the poet Jose Montoya writing El Louis, this great Chicano poem, which is about he's in a zoot suit, right? And he uses in his art the pachuco and the zoot suit. In the murals that were being created, you know, in the 60s and 70s, the pachuco is being embraced, right? And so even in the lowrider culture, right? A lot of the lowriders, when you talk to them, that they would call themselves pachucos, not lowriders, right? And so I think all of these sort of meanings are operating at the same time, which I think is fascinating for people to unpack, right? Because sometimes culture doesn't fit in these little boxes, and there's all this sort of like mixture happening, right? But I think, for me, I think what was also important is talking about how Chicano artists begin to embrace sort of the pachuco, right, as sort of this symbol of Chicano pride, right? And it's also part of this artistic tradition that we have in the barrio. You know, the flashpoint for it is that it really emerged during World War II, right? At this height of we're fighting this war, everybody is rationing, right? We're rationing sugar. Women are not wearing nylons because they're giving their nylons to the war effort. Meat, right? Material, everybody's sacrificing for World War II, right? And for this patriotic, you know, war effort. And so here you have the zoot suit that's all about excess, flagrant. It's beautiful. Think about the suits during that time. They're very conservative, right? Men are wearing their hair longer. So it really is like an affront, right, to sort of that World War II politics, right? And again, it's a youth movement. So it's kind of like how the youth are kind of like, again, questioning sort of that parent generation and what they're doing. And so it becomes to be seen as anti-American, anti-World War II, right? And as soon as you frame it as that, right, you get the zoot suit being banned from being made, right, in Los Angeles. The zoot suiters begin to be targeted, right, by law enforcement. And then more importantly, right, U.S. sailors get into skirmishes, a nice word of saying fights, with zoot suiters, right? And Mauricio Monzon, who wrote one of the first seminal books on the zoot suits, when there was a report done after the zoot suit riots was completed, they said that it was anxieties of race that fueled the zoot suit riots, because sailors, a lot of these sailors were white guys from the South that were not used to coming into cities, right? Because LA was a port. There were clashes with zoot suiters in Oakland and San Diego, anywhere where there were like port cities, right? They weren't used to seeing men of color walking the streets being full humans and equal, right? So it was a way for them to sort of like release, right, of their anxieties about race. But also the report found that they were letting off steam because of all their anxieties of being sent to World War II, right? And you have to keep in mind, like, who ended the zoot suit riots? It was the US Navy, because they didn't allow their sailors to come into Los Angeles when they saw that the police were doing nothing. The newspapers were heightening the race anxiety. When you have Time magazine in June of 1943 say that these are race riots in the street of LA, right? The Navy was like, wait. The enemy are not the zoot suiters, right? The enemy is the Nazis. The enemy is Japan, right? So they literally step in and cut off any weekend furloughs, right, to Los Angeles. And that's how, you know, those 13 days sort of were minimized. But I think what that report shows after the Zoot Suit riots is that anxieties about race, let's say white fears of black folks and brown folks being equal, having pride and walking the streets, right? Like this is their community, it set off